Hello, I'm Julie Swenson, Managing Director of Forward Theater Company in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mike Fisher, Milwaukee-based theater writer and dramaturg.
And I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray, founder and artistic director of Forward Theater Company, and this is Theater Forward, a monthly conversation about theater from a local, regional, and national perspective. From Madison to Manhattan, we're excited to share insights into our own company while exploring issues surrounding theater in the Midwest and around the country. Welcome to episode 112 of Theater Forward.
Fantastic.
So in this episode, inspired by the Summer Olympics and our upcoming production here at Forward of Rajiv Joseph's play, King James, we are talking about sports plays, or to be clearer, plays about sports. And while I am qualified to talk about theater, I confess to being pretty thin in my sports knowledge. So we have asked our Theater Forward producer, Scott Hayden, to join in today's conversation because he is a devotee of both. Welcome, Scott.
Yay, Scott.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Julie, why don't you kick us off?
Well, I am a huge sports fan. I have been a sports fan since very little, when my father took us on a regular basis to Wrigley Field, watched Chicago Cubs. We sat in the
My
bleachers.
condolences.
You know what? It's a gorgeous park. Regardless of how they played, it's a gorgeous park. We had to go early for batting practice, and maybe my brother would catch a ball, but he never did. So I've got this in my blood. And it's interesting when I hear theater people who say, sports isn't for me, because of the similarities of what we do on a stage versus that communion of going to a game, of being together in a group, of letting all politics and other things that might divide us to bring us together and root for a team or root for actors. It's so similar to me. And I do have some of my favorite plays about sports, and they start, as you can understand, in 1977 with Bleacher Bums, Organic Theater Company. It was a collective. Joe Mantegna, Dennis Franz, George Wendt was in it, but it is a bunch of people in the bleachers at Wrigley Field, and they get drunk, they argue, they cheer for the hapless Cubs, and that was really, truly one of the first ones I went, hold on, you can combine those two, and it works beautifully. I have a long list of some of my favorite sports plays, but I'm going to pass it off to the colleague that I have to say, when I first was hired at Forward Theater, it was in January of 2018, and I said to my colleague, Scott Hayden, do we not do March Madness in this office? And he went, oh my God, yes, now we do. And from then on, we've had a very robust March Madness.
Highlight of my career, Julie, is the day that we decided to have a March Madness bracket in the office. I knew it was a new dawn. It was a new era for us at Forward Theater. I had the privilege just yesterday of attending the first read-through, the first rehearsal for King James at Forward Theater. And I had read the play, but I had not heard it. I had not heard it out loud. And I was a mess. There was the relationship that these two characters have. Sports is just the common denominator, but it allowed these two men to have this relationship and to share so many things between them, and to grow, that I was spellbound. And I do wish that there was a little more sports in theater, if you will. I'm always surprised at the number of theater fans that confess that they either do not like sports or that they've never attended a sporting event. I'm always amazed that those two things aren't connected, because I think they're both art forms in and of themselves, but they share so many similarities.
I do have to say, I'm not someone who goes to basketball games all the time or follows the NBA or college teams really closely. But I certainly can appreciate the drama of sports. And talking about King James in particular, gosh, it was just such a beautiful play. It leapt off the page for a non-sports person. So it made me, very confident that for the folks who do follow basketball, that it would have that much more to offer. And when we discussed it in our advisory company conversation about whether we should, consider this play for an upcoming season, I was really struck by how much everybody loved this play, spanning from the folks who were, really into basketball and to those who are like, I don't follow it at all. I also have to say, I particularly loved that the biggest, sports nuts amongst our advisory company artists were the women. They were the most, passionate and excited about both sports and this play, King James. So that was it was a really fun conversation, and it was eye-opening, I think, about where those circles overlap on the Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that play in terms of its focus on community. I mean, you have two guys who are born in and raised in Cleveland, like Rajiv Joseph himself, whose pathological attachment to that ridiculous sports franchise, the Cleveland Cavaliers, is based in large part on the fact that they're from Cleveland and that they're a city which has never gotten its props. And all of a sudden, through this amazing basketball player, rises to prominence. And that connection to a sense of place or space is everything. And it's something that I think you see in theater as well as sports. I mean, I am the one person on this podcast who is not Madison based. I mean, I'm a Milwaukee based person. I have fallen in love. I had lived in Madison once, 30 years ago. I've fallen in love with Madison all over again, from the time I have spent with Forward and from the sense of a community that Forward has, and to the extent and in the ways that Forward itself helps anchor that sense of a community in the way that, say, the Green Bay Packers does in Green Bay. And I was just thinking about that in relation to Mr. Hayden, to you. Are you wearing, by the way, a Kansas City Chiefs shirt, or is it just red?
Yes, I'm guilty.
I mean, Scott, I'm about to out Scott, for those of you who don't know, he's from Kansas. He's a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan. And I wonder, because Scott, I share this. I mean, I like the guys in this play, like you, am from a Midwestern city, and I don't live there anymore. It's Detroit for me. And the sense of place for me is maintained through sports and my connection to those sports teams. And I'm wondering whether, you've lived in Wisconsin a long time. What is it about something from your childhood or something from that sports team that still resonates for you?
Oh, that's such a great question. I was a fan ever since I was a fan of the Chiefs ever since my father took me to a game when I was in the second grade. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And it didn't hurt that they won, even though that wasn't a trend for them at that time. And I remember, ever since then, we would try to make it back for games. Maybe not every year, but we would make it back. And so there are a lot of memories there. But I wouldn't call myself a diehard fan when I was in junior high or high school, because we were immersed in it. So it was easy to sort of, check in whenever you wanted to. But when I left Kansas and I moved to Chicago to try to be an actor, I found myself becoming deeper and deeper, a bigger and bigger fan of the team. And I realized that it was my connection to home. It was how I stayed connected to my father. It was how I stayed connected to my childhood. And I didn't miss a game. And that's, 20 years later, here I am, really enjoying where they are right now. But for a long time, even when the team was not good, and do yourself a favor and Google Kansas City Chiefs 10 worst playoff losses, and you will see some of the most heartbreaking stories you have ever read in your life. It was miserable to be a Chiefs fan back in the 2000s, and even just 10 years ago. But it didn't stop me from living it, because every time I watched a game, I was home again.
Yeah, I was thinking John Stenerud in 1970 in the triple overtime, but I digress in terms of Chiefs painful losses. But it's that sense of, and you talk to people about Forward, or you talk to people who are fans of theater, they have that same. There is something about that is very, very similar, and I think it's because we're coming together as a community in an actual physical space. We're not watching Netflix. We're not at the Cinescape. And so even if you don't know the people next to you, which is often true when you're at a sporting event as well, you feel this intense sense of community with them. There are times in sports events where I have just hugged people I have never seen before and will probably never see again, because something great just happened. And I feel that way, although I refrain from hugging. I guess I'm more repressed when I'm at a theater event. But you feel that same sense. You want to talk to the people next to you, as soon as it's over. You're just dying to share because you know that you've had that fellowship. And I can't think of any other activities besides live arts, and theater for us, and sports that gives you that feeling. I don't even think church, for me, at least in my lifetime, and this is not a comment of pro or anti-religious comment, it doesn't have that same feel that those two things do in American life.
Well, it's the reason that sports bars are popular, that sporting events, that we don't watch sports in the same way we don't see theater on our couch. There was a time in a very short period in our past we did. We are very happy not to have to do that anymore, that we're out and we are with a group experiencing the same thing. And the similarities of going to a play or going to a sports bar and watching your favorite team are really, they're integrated, and they're very similar. And the experience, that collective experience, I think, are the same, is the same.
Take it a step further and go to any city, and then you'll find that there are specific bars that are a Packers bar. I've been to a Packers bar in Denver, Colorado. There was a Chiefs bar in Chicago, Illinois. And those were, not to call them churches, but they were community gathering places for those people. And I made friends with people that I otherwise would have never connected with. And we shared a lot of heartbreak, but we still shared a lot.
Right. Can I take us to another play, one of my very favorites? It's called Take Me Out, Richard Greenberg. And it's good. About, as Jen started this with, that so many of these plays about sports are about a lot of other things. This is about a mixed race athlete who comes out, and how he is portrayed in the media, how his teammates handle him. So it's deep and it's fraught. But the passage that sticks with me to this day, and every time I watch a baseball game, is the character of Mason Marzak, who is the manager, who is also gay, knows nothing about baseball, but becomes a convert. Actually has a quote of, "Baseball is a perfect metaphor for hope in a democratic society." That's a quote from the play. And he has a monologue of watching a home run and how we stop in baseball and we celebrate that home run. And it's a given that they're going to go on go the four bases, but we spend the time watching them run to each base and celebrate that home run. And honestly, I saw this play at Milwaukee Chamber Theater with John McGivern giving that monologue, and just bawled. Mm-hmm. It was so beautiful to me. And every time I watch a baseball game and they have a home run, those words are in my head.
I love that. He's the accountant, right, for the team?
He's the accountant, yes.
And I got to see that one on Broadway with my dear colleague Dennis O'Hare originating that role. And same, it brought me to tears. And I'm not, relating to it as the sports fan, just as the human. And that's a beautiful example of using sports, both to celebrate sports itself, but also to wrestle with other issues related to being human, to, issues in our community. Yeah, I love that play. Another one that immediately comes to mind for me. Well, we don't need to talk more about the elaborate entrance of Chad Deity on this podcast. We've talked about it so many times, but that is a great play that wrestles. See what I did there? It wrestles with some
Nicely done. Nicely done.
I wish I could say that was intentional, but at least I recognized it as it was coming, as the words were coming out. With really big issues it deals with. We read a play out of the UK not long ago here at Forward by Ella Road called Fair Play that deals with issues of gender through the lens of two young female track athletes. And one of them tests as having higher testosterone, and it becomes a whole thing. Is she a woman, right? Can she compete? Obviously, that is extremely timely and not becoming less so, as we all saw during the Olympics. I read a play by Andrew Hinderaker a number of years ago called Colossal that talks about football, both as from the perspective of someone who is a huge, passionate fan, who'd grown up as a fan, who remained a fan, who loved all the beautiful things that football can make you feel and make you think about, and was also dealing with some of the real societal problems with that sport and that sport as an industry, and some of the inherent, racial and gender issues, the traumatic brain injuries, all of that. Again, using this play, celebrating the uniqueness of this sport and of its fans, and also using it to dig deeper. There have been some truly stunning pieces of theater that do that.
Well, and again, with both sports and theater, you have, even in a theater play that is not an issue play, like a sports play, it ends up surfacing all this other stuff.
Right.
And I mean, that's certainly what happens in King James, which is, those of you who will see it will see, like Chad Deity, which, by the way, you can see around the same time in Milwaukee in a production at Next Act Theater that's going to be directed by Michael Cody. Both of those are plays that also surface issues of race and class, and what it means to assert yourself through the medium, not just of sports, but with sports as a metaphor for what it means to be human. To further kick this around, all right, I'm going with Jen on this, soccer, but actually football. Play from the UK, Roy Williams, Sing Your Hearts Out for the Lads, is a brilliant play, which takes place in a sports bar during one of the hapless English national team's many losses. They've got their own Kansas City Chiefs story to tell, but it turns into a near race riot between the people in the sitting there watching it, because when England starts to lose the game, all kinds of other toxic sludge comes to the surface. It's a brilliant play, and dialogue in it's amazing. We will never be able to do it. It's way too large, way too hard to cast, but it captures that sense that this is not just about sports, because sports is never just about sports. You can't, Jen, you referred to the Olympics. I guess I'd like to hear you say more about that. You couldn't watch the Olympics, or certainly the opening ceremonies this year, and think sports is just about sports.
Absolutely. We saw such drama. And again, I love the Olympics every 4 years, 2 years now. And I watch it a lot. This year in particular, I just thought that the stories of the games, the athletes we were seeing, I found particularly compelling, partly because it really felt like a year in which the biggest stories were about women and female athletes. That was really refreshing to see. And so many women of color, that was really refreshing to see. But it also excavated, as you were just saying, the toxic sludge around us. I think about the unbelievably ugly transphobia and misgendering and racism that came out around the female boxing champ from Algeria. It came out around how people were talking about the American gymnasts and the incredible women of color who were leading that team. And yet, it felt like we kind of rose overall to be our better selves as fans, as as athletic teams. And, for me, the moment seeing LeBron James holding, the American flag on that boat during the opening ceremony, surrounded by this huge and incredibly diverse American team, knowing we were about to do King James here at Forward, it just, it felt, this Olympics in particular, even though it did bring up some of that sludge, I felt like was elevating so much of what's best about this country. And I love seeing that. I love the storytelling of that.
Well, and I loved the sort of, in the opening ceremony specifically, I loved the way in which, and this is not about America, this is about France, but the way they told the entire history of France and focused on its cultural, its cultural prominence in opera and dance and whatever, and tied that into what we were seeing in terms of sport. And it was just for me on the right side of tipping over, and I worry about this with both sports and theater, tipping from sports into spectacle or theater into spectacle. But it managed to sort of make you feel proud of the intertwining of culture and sports, that all this is part of one thing, that our genre lines between the two are blurring, which is why you now read about new games in gaming sections of the arts and culture section of the New York Times. And that sort of makes sense. I mean, you see that technology coming over into theater as well.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that the ancient Olympic Games and frankly, the early modern Olympic Games had arts Olympics, as there were arts competitions alongside the athletic ones. We should bring that back.
Yeah. Let's.
Well, I think the two real actors on this podcast, Jen, it's not you and it's not me, would love that. And I guess I would like to hear from the two real actors who have spent part of their life going through actor training. Like, how does being an athlete and being an actor, insofar as just growing up, you either played sports or were around it, do you see similarities in the way in which, as an actor, you have to see yourself?
Oh goodness, yes. I think there are so many parallels just from a preparation standpoint. There has to be extreme discipline in your training. There's such a balance of both physical and mental strength. There's coordination, teamwork, leadership, adaptability, self-control, and then ultimately the ability to perform under pressure in front of a crowd of people. It's one thing you can be really great in the gym and be in the best shape of your life, but how good are you at training when all of a sudden you're doing it in front of 1,000 people? Being able to do that in front of a crowd I think that's a skill that both share, and that is unique to both of those professions.
I totally agree, Scott. And I will add that sports like theater, which is one of the incredible things about young people doing either or both, is that if you are not there, if you decide not to show up, it is a detriment to the entire group. If you don't show up to a play, it might not be able to go on. If you don't show up for your baseball game or your football game or your soccer or whatever, that will have a negative impact on your team. And it's a recognition of how the individuals make up this team, make up this cast, and how important each person is. And that's some real valuable lessons.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why there are so many studies that show that participating in a team sport, participating in theater or other, performing arts, you don't have to go on to either of those things as your career to reap the benefits of that in your professional and personal lives. It really, like you said, Julie, these are things that teach young people incredibly valuable life skills. And that's something else they have in common.
A shout out to my fellow forensicators, anyone who did high school forensics. I would love to see humorous interpretation as an Olympic event. That would be spectacular. I would watch that all day.
All day.
Let's get on that.
Well, I mean, come on. If we're gonna have, and I mean this with love because I thought this was so much fun. If we're gonna have the ping pong, which has been around now for a while, or now breakdancing, what's to say? I mean, those of you who have been around me know I talk with my hands. Even again, every day I'm knocking over somebody's water glass when I'm at a table. So, I think Scott, I think we can do this for you. We can make it dramatic. We've talked about a lot of plays. I want to make sure. I mean, I have Julie, I know you said you have a long list. I mean, I do too. Are there other plays that we should be showcasing or highlighting that any of us have loved in our lives that are sports related?
I mean, the Wolves. We've talked about the Wolves on this podcast too.
Yeah.
But you can't talk about sports on stage,
Right.
especially when performed by teenagers, as it was in the co-pro between Renaissance Theater Works and First Stage Young Company in Milwaukee last season. For all of the reasons that we've already talked about, that is a very special piece of theater.
I did have the Wolves and Chad Deity on my list, of course, but I'm gonna keep with my baseball theme and Damn Yankees, which it's a ridiculous, beautiful, wonderful, all-inclusive musical, basically about signing your soul away to the devil to be a better baseball player. But my goodness, some fantastic songs. And one of our good friends, Linda Stevens, was on Broadway with Damn Yankees.
I saw her in that. It was just so good.
And it's been around since 1955. There's been a lot of iterations. It was made into a movie. It's just, I think it is a beautiful melding of a really fun musical with, the New York Yankees. Come on now. Love it.
I say this as somebody who grew up with the idea that, rooting for the Yankees was like rooting for U.S. Steel, or whose, favorite line in Old Man and the Sea as a Tigers fan is the old man saying, "I fear the Tigers of Detroit." He's a Yankees fan. To me, what's great about that musical and what's great about baseball is more for me than any other sport. This isn't true, but at least in our minds, it captures the idea that the every person, somebody who's not built with the physical prowess or the whatever that's required to play professional football or professional basketball, more or less for most people, most of the time now, that you can still make it. And so you have this schlep in Damn Yankees, who is just a fan, who, in selling his soul, has his dream come true to be this great baseball player. And I will tell you, I will confess on this podcast, and probably never again, when the Tigers were trying to beat the Yankees in a playoff series a number of years ago, I was not in a sports bar, I'm sorry to say. I was in my TV room, and I had my glove on, and I was pretending to throw next to the TV, making all kinds of deals with deities and everybody else, that if the Tigers would win this game, I would do the equivalent of selling my soul. And you know what? I've had moments in theater where I felt like I had been transfigured in that same kind of way. Where one of the things that's great about a communitarian moment in sports or theater is you lose your sense of self. All your cares and concerns, the stuff you walked in with, at some point in a really good performance or a really good game, just drops away. And all you care about is watching with these people around you this beautiful moment come true. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Well, I'm going to remember that forever, Mike.
I will go to a sports bar with you, Mike.
When you say that, Mike, it makes me, I've always kind of wondered, even though I am both a sports and theater fan, I have always wondered why people keep attending Hamlet if they know how it's going to end. Why do they come back to watch that story over and over again? And it's totally sports. It's because it's not about how it ends. It's because you want to see how he comes from behind. You want to see how he winds up winning or losing, even if you know what the answer is, because it's the process, it's the journey, it's the how that grabs us, and that totally parallels with sports. Obviously, yes, there's an outcome that you wish would happen, but it's about how you got to that point that makes the entire experience what it is.
Oh, that's so right. I can't tell you how many, I've worn it out. It's actually still on VHS, but how many times I have watched there's a video that was put out by Major League Baseball years ago of the 1968 World Series when the Tigers came down from 3-1 and ended up winning the series. And of course I know how it's going to end. It doesn't matter. That's why a network like ESPN can continue to show these great moments or great games from the past and have people watch them. That's the equivalent of Hamlet. Or with a comedy, having it end well.
All of this is making me so happy, y'all. Are there any other sports plays that we want to, make sure to mention before we wrap this delightful conversation up?
Just one, and I'm going with Julie's baseball theme, and it's again, it is and it isn't a sports play. It's Fences by August Wilson, which is about a great player who, because he was born Black and because he was too late in terms of the Jackie Robinson moment, never got to do the things that he might have been able to do. So what it's also about is the American dream, and for whom it works and for whom it doesn't. And that's also what sports and theater, American theater at least, in so many ways are about so much of the time, is this disconnect between our dreams and ideals of what our athletes should be, of what our team should be, of what the hometown that we remember and watch them in should be, and the reality that we actually live. And that can be both painful, but also in the way nostalgia also works, an opportunity to conjure those visions or moments of greatness. And that play, yes, it's a tragedy, that play is, but it also speaks to me, as does Wilson in it, of these beautiful moments of just missing the possibility of what it means to be a full-fledged person capable of realizing all their ideals and potentials.
Oh, I'm so glad you added that one to our list. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful example of a sports play that graces the American stage. I think we should leave it there. Thanks, Scott Hayden, for joining us for this one.
It is my sincere pleasure. Go Chiefs, go Jayhawks, go Royals.
And we will say that is all for this episode of Theater Forward, a conversation about theater in Wisconsin, the Midwest, and America. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jen Uphoff Gray.
And I'm Julie Swenson.
And I'm Mike Fisher. Our podcast is indeed produced by Scott Hayden, whom I will be joining somewhere next February, even if it's a Chiefs bar, to watch my beloved Lions and his Chiefs in the Super Bowl, duking it out for everything. You can watch Scott's amazing work, not on the gridiron or in the theater, but with this podcast. You can check us out by tuning in to Facebook. And there, what you want to look for is Theater Forward, theater as always spelled with an ER. Thanks so much.
And if you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us and leave a comment. Tell us your favorite sports play. We'd love to hear from you.
We are so grateful to have you listening, and we will be back soon with another Theater Forward conversation.